Victor Lang didn't even let Sandra finish her sentence.
And if you look at the revised freight projections for Q3, stop.
The word cracked across the executive conference room hard enough to silence the sound of typing. 20 people sat around the glass table, department heads, finance leads, HR, even legal. Sandra slowly lowered the presentation remote. Victor stood from the head of the table holding a stack of printed emails.
You want to explain these?
He slid them across the table toward her. Sandra glanced down. Her stomach tightened instantly. The emails were real. Messages between her and Strategen Logistics, the company's biggest competitor. But half the conversation chains were missing. Victor, those were approved vendor discussions during the transition
Don't.
His voice sharpened.
Do not insult everyone in this room by lying.
Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Sandra looked around the table for someone, anyone, to say something. Most of them wouldn't even meet her eyes. Victor pointed directly at her.
Pack your things. You're done.
The room went completely still. Sandra felt heat rush into her face. You're firing me? Right now?
You leaked confidential pricing models to a competitor.
Victor tossed another page onto the table.
Frankly, termination is the best outcome you can hope for.
Near the door, 2 security guards appeared quietly outside the glass wall. That's when Sandra realized this had been planned before the meeting even started. The HR director stared down at her folded hands without saying a word. Sandra forced herself to breathe. Those emails were part of the shipping conversion project. You approved them yourself. Victor leaned forward slowly.
You don't get to talk after what you did.
A few executives shifted uncomfortably, not because they thought she was innocent, because they were afraid of him. Sandra gathered her laptop with stiff hands, while Victor continued speaking to the room as if she were already gone.
We'll be conducting a full internal review. Legal will determine whether further action is necessary.
Further action, meaning lawsuits, criminal accusations, public blame. Sandra looked at Victor again, and suddenly something felt wrong. He wasn't acting angry. He was acting nervous. His fingers tapped too quickly against the table. One of the finance executives looked genuinely alarmed when Victor mentioned Strategen's name. Then Sandra remembered the irregular shipping invoices she'd found 3 days earlier. Invoices tied directly to Victor's office. The same records he'd snapped at her for questioning.
Stay in your lane, Sandra.
At the time, she thought he was protecting the acquisition deal. Now she wasn't so sure. She slid her laptop into her bag. Then her phone started ringing, loud, sharp. Every head in the room turned. Sandra glanced at the screen, and her pulse stopped. Ethan Cross, CEO of Strategen Logistics, Victor's biggest competitor. Victor shot to his feet so fast his chair rolled backward into the wall. For the first time all morning, he looked genuinely afraid.
Do not answer that.
Sandra stared at the phone vibrating in her hand. Victor took a step toward her.
I said, don't answer it.
The entire room watched. For a second, Sandra almost listened. That instinct to avoid conflict had carried her through years under Victor Lang. Keep your head down. Don't argue. Don't make scenes. Then she pressed accept.
Hello?
Ethan Cross's voice came through calm and direct.
Sandra, I need to speak with you immediately.
A short pause.
Are you still employed there?
Every executive at the table could hear him through the silent room. Sandra looked at Victor standing rigid beside the conference table. Not anymore. Across the room, someone shifted uncomfortably. Victor snapped, "End the call." Ethan ignored him completely. "I'm downstairs in a lobby." Sandra blinked. "You're here?" "Yes, and you need to come down now." Victor's face tightened instantly, not angry, panicked. Sandra had never seen Victor Lang panic before. She remembered the first time she'd communicated with Stratogen months earlier, during the vendor transition project. Victor himself had approved the contact. Their companies were coordinating freight routes temporarily during acquisition prep. Then last week, without explanation, Victor suddenly ordered all communication with Stratogen terminated. No meetings, no emails.
No calls. When Sandra asked why, Victor shut his office door and lowered his voice. "You're asking questions outside your department." "What about the missing shipping records?" she'd asked. Victor's expression hardened immediately. "Focus on your own work." Now, standing in the conference room, Sandra finally understood why that conversation suddenly felt important. The HR director stepped beside her awkwardly. "Sandra, we should go." Not, "we should talk," not, "let's sort this out." Just go. Sandra walked out of the conference room carrying her bag, while conversations immediately restarted behind her in hushed voices. The hallway felt colder than usual. Employees glanced up from desks, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to be seen looking at her. At the elevator, one of her longtime co-workers, Denise, hurried past carrying folders. She slowed for barely a second. "You should leave before this gets worse," Denise whispered. Sandra frowned. What does that mean? But Denise was already walking away, not angry, scared. Downstairs, the lobby doors opened just as Sandra stepped out of the elevator. A tall man in a charcoal coat stood near reception. Ethan Cross. He walked toward her immediately. "Sandra Hale?" She nodded cautiously. Ethan lowered his voice. "You're being set up." Sandra froze. "What?" Before Ethan could answer, elevator doors slammed open behind them. Victor stormed into the lobby with 2 lawyers following close behind. Half the employees in the lobby suddenly found reasons to stop walking. Victor looked directly at Ethan. "If you hire her," he said coldly, "your company becomes part of this investigation." The lobby had gone so quiet that Sandra could hear the reception desk phone ringing in another room. Victor walked straight toward Ethan with the confidence of someone used to controlling every conversation the second he entered it. "You're interfering in an active corporate investigation," Victor said. "I suggest you leave the building." Ethan didn't move. Instead, he asked one calm question. "Then why did your finance director send us altered numbers?" Several employees nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Victor's expression tightened for half a second. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Ethan replied. "The projections your company submitted during acquisition review didn't match the operational data." Sandra looked between them. Operational data. The same inconsistencies she'd flagged days earlier. Victor gave a short laugh meant for the audience gathering around them. "This is desperation. You got caught communicating with my employee, and now you're trying to create confusion." Ethan folded his arms. "Your company anonymously sent Stratogen financial projections 3 weeks ago." Murmurs spread instantly through the lobby. Victor snapped. "That's a lie." "Really?" Ethan said. "Because those files contained manipulated freight performance numbers. Numbers Sandra Hale questioned internally before she was suddenly fired." Sandra's stomach dropped. Then another memory hit her. 3 nights earlier during acquisition prep, Victor had come to her office after everyone else left.
"The system locked me out," he'd said casually. "I need your credentials for 10 minutes.
At the time, she hadn't thought twice about it. Now her blood ran cold. Victor turned sharply toward her.
"Tell them."
Sandra stared at him. "What?"
"That you gave me access willingly. That you were helping manage external communications."
There it was. Not panic anymore. A pivot. He was pulling her down with him. Employees were openly staring now. Even the HR director looked uncertain. One executive quietly stepped away while dialing his phone. Ethan reached into his coat pocket calmly.
"Our compliance team preserved every email, server route, and metadata record connected to those files."
Victor's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in," he warned. Ethan looked at Sandra instead.
"Actually, I do."
He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder.
"Sandra Hale, Strategen Logistics would like to formally offer you a position effective immediately."
The entire lobby froze again. Victor stared at him in disbelief. Ethan continued evenly.
"Double your current salary, full legal protection, and access to our forensic audit team because I believe you were framed."
Sandra opened her mouth slightly, stunned. Victor suddenly ripped Sandra's terminated company laptop out of HR's hands, then slammed it onto the marble floor. The crack echoed through the lobby.
"She's lying to all of you."
The shattered screen flickered, and incoming notifications from the board of directors began appearing one after another. The broken laptop buzzed against the marble floor as notification after notification lit up the cracked screen. Board member, call me now. Emergency review request. Acquisition status update. Sandra looked up slowly. Victor saw them too. For the first time since this started, the color drained from his face. Around the lobby, executives began checking their own phones almost simultaneously. One after another, screens lit up. Quiet conversations erupted instantly. What's happening? Why is the board involved? Did the deal collapse? Victor stepped forward aggressively.
"Nobody says another word until legal reviews this."
But nobody was listening to him anymore. Ethan crouched beside the broken laptop calmly.
"Timing's unfortunate."
Victor glared at him. "You fabricated this entire situation."
"No," Ethan replied. "Your assistant account routed the files to us."
Sandra's eyes widened. Victor spoke immediately.
"Impossible."
Ethan stood again.
"The files passed through Sandra's credentials first. Someone copied her login token during acquisition prep."
Sandra suddenly remembered Victor standing beside her desk late that night while she stepped away to answer a call. Her workstation unlocked. Her credentials exposed. Everything connected at once. The fake leak, the edited emails, the public firing. Victor needed her blamed before anyone started tracing the records. 2 security officers entered the lobby again, except this time, they weren't looking at Sandra. One moved quietly beside Victor.
"Sir,"
the guard said carefully,
"we've been instructed not to let anyone leave until the board arrives."
Victor stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Ethan reached into his folder again and removed printed documents.
"Server timestamps, access logs, recorded authorization calls."
He handed copies toward legal counsel.
"Your CEO manipulated operational forecasts before acquisition review."
Victor snapped toward Sandra and lowered his voice sharply. "This goes away if you stop talking." Sandra looked at him. A few hours earlier, she probably would have backed down. That instinct was still there. Freeze, stay quiet, survive. But now she could see exactly what he'd done.
"You fired me before anyone could question me,"
she said quietly. You needed everyone to think I was guilty first. Victor's expression hardened. Careful. Ethan stepped beside her. He needed a scapegoat before the board saw the real numbers. At that exact moment, Victor's phone rang. He grabbed it instantly, forcing confidence back into his posture.
Yes?
A pause. Then his expression changed completely. His shoulders stiffened, eyes unfocused. The entire lobby watched him silently. Finally, Victor spoke in a low voice. You're suspending me? Another pause. Then he slowly lowered the phone from his ear as the board member's final words echoed loud enough for Sandra to hear. Effective immediately. By the end of the week, Victor Lang's entire narrative had collapsed. Internal investigators pulled months of financial records tied to the acquisition deal and found manipulated shipping performance reports buried inside executive forecasting files. Freight efficiency numbers had been inflated quarter after quarter to make the company appear far more profitable during merger negotiations. The anonymous competitor leak Victor blamed on Sandra had actually started the moment Strategen questioned inconsistencies in those reports. And once auditors started asking questions, Victor needed someone else to carry the blame. Sandra. Her department controlled the logistics forecasting systems. Her credentials had access to every projection. And unlike most executives, she wasn't politically connected enough to fight back publicly. Investigators eventually recovered the full email chains Victor presented during the meeting. Entire approval threads had been deleted from the printouts shown to executives. The missing sections clearly proved Sandra's communication with Strategen had been authorized during the vendor transition project. Victor had known that, which meant the firing had been staged from the beginning. Public humiliation first, isolation second, then legal pressure before anyone could verify the truth. 3 former executives later admitted Victor privately warned leadership that defending Sandra could damage confidence during acquisition. Nobody wanted to risk their careers, so they stayed silent. That part stayed with Sandra more than anything else. Not Victor yelling, not security outside the room. The silence. A week later, Sandra returned briefly to collect personal belongings from her old office. People who once ignored her suddenly stopped her in hallways. Sandra, I'm sorry. We didn't know everything. You have to understand how much pressure there was. One manager couldn't even hold eye contact while apologizing. Sandra listened quietly, but didn't comfort anyone, because she remembered standing alone in that conference room while every person avoided looking at her. Now those same people looked away for different reasons.
Outside the building, reporters waited near the entrance after news of the suspended merger became public. Investor lawsuits followed within days. The board froze Victor's compensation package pending fraud investigation. Several HR executives resigned after internal communications revealed they knew Sandra had not been fully investigated before termination. Industry publications picked up the story fast. Senior analyst cleared in acquisition scandal. CEO under investigation for financial manipulation. Within a month, Victor Lang's reputation, built over 15 years, was unraveling publicly in real time. Meanwhile, Ethan Cross kept his word. Sandra officially joined Strategen Logistics as Director of Operations Strategy. Double the salary, full legal support. But more than that, something unfamiliar happened during her first executive meeting. When Sandra spoke, people listened. Nobody interrupted her halfway through a sentence. Nobody weaponized her work against her. Ethan openly credited the logistics systems she'd built years earlier, the same systems Victor tried to use to destroy her. And clients noticed. Several major accounts quietly moved their contracts away from Victor's former company and signed with Strategen specifically because Sandra was leading operations oversight. Months later, Sandra walked into a strategy meeting overlooking the city skyline at Strategen headquarters. Large screens displayed quarterly growth numbers, tied directly to the freight model she had originally designed late at night years ago, while working unpaid overtime under Victor. Only now, her work carried her own name beside it. The room settled as she reached the front table. Her new team waited for her to begin. No tension, no fear, no silence designed to isolate her. Sandra opened the presentation calmly, and this time, nobody looked away. The last time Victor Lang pointed at Sandra Hale in a meeting, he thought he was ending her career. He ended his own instead.